How's everyone doing? It's a quiet room. Right, I hear a little hangover here and there. So this is going to be a little different. Smith & Beta, just to give you a quick introduction, is a talent development and education company. So we work with agencies as well as brands around the industry, helping employees get smarter about digital and technology. So what you're about to experience is essentially very similar to a class or a workshop that we might design for an agency. And what we're finding is that in the industry, there's a whole lot of need for education. I've heard it actually quite a few times. I sent a survey out that was really well received. We had about, 60 people out of the VIPs answers. That's more than half. And what was interesting about the surveys we asked, what do you find that's important for you right now with talent? One of the answers was, we want to learn how to work in a different way. So although Matt and Ryan are going to be talking about prototyping today, this is really about new ways of working. So if you're used to coming to a conference and just sitting back on your device and hanging out and maybe having cocktails, the next hour and a half is going to be a little bit different. We're going to actually have you do hands-on sketching and prototyping. And we hope that through that experience, you gain a lot of knowledge and you go back to where you work and you say, hey, I got something out of this conference that was really meaningful. So thank you for participating ahead of time, and I'll introduce Matt and Ryan. Come on up.
2, 3, 4.
Hi everyone, good morning. This is Matt, I'm Ryan. We both have lots of collective years in the sort of ad agency marketing world. Previously, Matt was Chief Digital Officer at Arnold and Havas, and I ran the digital production department at Arnold with Matt as well. We worked for many years together. Both recently made shifts sort of outside of the sort of marketing space. Matt runs a software and design consultancy called Vermonster, and I currently work at Google in New York City at the Google Creative Lab. So we're really excited to be here today. We're excited to do something a little bit different, as Allison mentioned, just sort of get a little bit hands-on. So we're going to talk for just a little bit, but then we're really, since we're both pretty awful at public speaking, we're going to sort of turn it, and we're just going to sort of get our hands dirty with you guys and sketch and draw and talk a little bit about sort of our backgrounds, which are really in software development, and sort of how some of the processes and the different ways of working that we've grown up with and that we now sort of apply every day might be applicable to sort of your world, agencies, and sort of the future challenges that you face. So we're excited to be here.
All right. As Ryan said, we are going to be talking about prototyping and doing an exercise. But just like before we just like kind of jumped into it, we just asked ourselves, like, why should we even be talking about prototyping, like with agency people? Like the agency business is like kind of going reasonably well. Just like why is it that just like we need to consider this? And the way that we decided to frame it is just like looking at the broader context of change, which is a big subject of this conference, and just like thinking about how prototyping works within this like idea of a profound change that's hitting the marketing and advertising industry. So we'll kind of start there. Like something that when we worked in advertising, didn't think that much about, just is the fact that advertising is a very mature industry. Like it's been around in its modern form. I'm not an industry scholar, but probably you could say sometime around the 60s, David Ogilvy wrote Confessions of an Advertising Man then. But when you think about like the way that agencies have evolved, like the basic structures, the titling, just like the way that clients and agencies like kind of like relate to one another and work, it hasn't changed a whole lot like just in the past 50 years. There's a lot of new things that agencies have, but the core structure, the core ways of working, are still very like kind of much like they were back when Kennedy was president and record labels were still like kind of making vinyl. At my previous job, I got to see a really great speaker, a Harvard Business School professor called Michael Tushman, who dedicates his study to understanding the effect that technology has on changes in industry, which was really fascinating, and I'll just like try to do my best to explain just like why I think that is now. He talked to a group of our executives just about the Swiss watch industry, and maybe some of you guys have read about this case study, as it seems to be getting a lot more ink of late. Like back in the 1970s or like the late 60s, like the Swiss like watch industry was at its peak. It employed over 90,000 people, like within Switzerland, and it was like focused on this incredibly meticulous craft of manufacturing mechanical watches, which was like really the creation of an art form. Just in 1970, the quartz watch was introduced, and quartz watches just were radically more like simple, just like from a manufacturing standpoint, they were a lot less expensive, and they were also just a lot more accurate. But the Swiss auto manufacturing industry looked at this change and decided that it wasn't something they were going to act on. They didn't feel that these types of watches were relevant to the people that bought watches, who were a little bit more affluent and just admired the craft. They felt that it was a fad, which is something that maybe a lot of us can relate to. They thought it was a fad right up until their business declined by over 50% in under 10 years, and then they decided maybe it wasn't such a fad. The great thing is they managed to reverse this decline and just build the industry back up. But it wasn't until they had suffered a catastrophic decline that they were able to motivate the action to take the change to build themselves back up. And what Professor Tushman talked about, just is the advertising industry, is facing a similar change. It's we know things are changing. We know they're changing more rapidly. We're not quite sure exactly when. Just existing businesses might go into decline. It could be 5 years. It could be 10 years. It could be in 12 months. But everyone that pays attention to this space knows that we're in the midst of dealing with change. And the difficult thing is to know when to act on it. You don't want to invest too far ahead of the curve. You don't want to just jeopardize the existing clients, but you also can't be held back by not experimenting with new ways of working. So when we start to think about prototyping, it's within this context of just how can we start to adopt tools and processes from adjacent industries to help us protect against falling behind.
And I think when we talk about sort of the change that Matt's sort of alluding to, the title of our presentation is sort of pills or prototyping. And I think when you know you have sort of a condition physically, just I think all of us sort of, we know that we should be exercising more, we should probably be eating better, but sometimes we try to solve it with a set of pills, can we sort of dose this thing out of ourselves? And I think for all of us, it's sort of in the agency world, it's important to remember that we're going to have to do more than just sort of create initiatives that are sort of help rebuild sort of our processes, our teams, our organizational design. We're going to have to do more than sort of headlines. And I think our proposal for you guys today is maybe that prototyping is one way to look at not only how we sort of change sort of the way we create sort of project-specific work, but even sort of the approach that we might take to things as big as sort of job titling or sort of organizational design or sort of changing sort of really fundamental internal operations sort of initiatives that many of you may be sort of underway with. I think we all know sort of the difference at this point between sort of what an advertisement and sort of a product experience looks like. But even just this morning, lots of talk about sort of talent drift towards sort of software organizations away from sort of creative agencies. Just how do we look at sort of the way that maybe software firms sort of have worked for a long time and continue to work, and as we continue to think about sort of creating different things for our clients, what does that really mean for sort of the way we function as teams, the way we function as organizations? Yeah, I think hopefully prototyping is just one way to think about doing that.
Yeah, so as Ryan mentioned, we used to work together, and just the thing that we used to ask ourselves is why isn't our agency better at creating digital materials? We had lots of smart people. There was no just reason that we couldn't kind of conceive of or execute great digital ideas, but as an organization we weren't doing it consistently. And I think what we started to understand is just it's a very rational kind of conclusion. The way that we work, the way the departments were structured, the way the process worked, was all designed to support just a very kind of time-honored output, mostly film, like photography. But when you start to thread in other things Yvonne was talking about social media and just software or products, it's it doesn't fit as cleanly just into the existing processes. So when we started to think about prototyping, it's tools that could put us in a position as a company to do better work. And just we also had to think about not borrowing too much from software. Software just offers some great ideas, but it shouldn't get in the way of the central mission of advertising agencies, which is how can we do a better job of connecting brands and consumers. So borrowing the right parts, like just from prototyping without just being overwhelmed and just like pretending that we're all moving into software. As Allison said, we're going to be doing an exercise. Like sometimes, I mean, that freaks me out. Just like I feel like I'm going to put in the spot, or just like be holding a soldering iron or Arduino board, or just like kind of be put in a position of once again being humiliated. Like this is going to be like kind of like super easy. It's like working with pencils and papers. Like kind of like just we all have experience just in using software, and it's like kind of like showing that a lot of this work can be much more accessible than you might think. So just like I mean, just to set some of the anxiety aside, like you can totally do this. And just there's value in doing it. Prototyping just is popular because it's super useful. IDEO, which is a company that a lot of us like have great admiration for, just it's a critical part of the way they do all of their work. Their CEO Tim Brown describes it as the faster that we can make our ideas tangible, the sooner we will be able to evaluate them, refine them, and zero in on the best solution. And just like at their core, just like they address two things. Like one is improving quality. Just by stripping out a lot of like documentation, and just a lot of us are accustomed to work just like where you spend a long amount of time in like kind of in strategy, like in conceptual development, and the product gets built at the very end. And just like this process like effectively reverses it. By beginning to work on the product at the very beginning, like you can often just like devote a lot more time to improving that product. So like product improvement is one. The second is like economic. Like you invest a lot less time and money like in developing bad ideas because you realize that they're bad really early. So just like those are things that are themes that I think like kind of make this pass across industries very effectively. Other things that are very important, like here's a 3D printer that like I think a lot of us are using more and more, just like for prototyping, like kicking out a pair of shoes that I think Ryan would look great in. Like by creating these physical objects or these like kind of paper prototypes, just like you quickly understand just like whether or not like an idea just is usable. Just like you can identify the barriers just in its use or in its production. Like having an artifact like from a process like this also makes it a lot easier to sell. Like selling within your organization, or also like kind of turning around and selling it to a client. It's one thing to put together a PowerPoint presentation. It's another thing to hand somebody like something that they can play around with and use, even if it's in a very crude state. Like I mean, it's a very persuasive tool to help like kind of express the value of an idea. And the last one just like kind of like seems like not that important, but I might argue that it's the most important, is because prototyping involves like like teams and complementary skill sets like coming together to work on a single idea. It distributes the investment just that people feel just in a project that they're working in. Like so, it's a great means of improving team dynamics. So again, like the question is, why don't we do this more? Like if it's such a good idea, if it works so many other places, if it's inherently easy, just like kind of like why aren't advertising agencies like kind of like using it more often? And I think like some of it relates to the fact that advertising and digital just like really come from different cultures. And it's not that one's better than the other, just like kind of, it's just that they're different. Like so, thinking about advertising, a lot of the culture of advertising has been borrowed from the film industry, just like production techniques. Like, I mean, like film is a great way, just like for telling a very emotional, persuasive like story. There's all these great references, just like for how this work, that save companies time and money. No one just goes into a room and flips on a camera. There's a lot of like kind of techniques that we've developed over the past 50 years that help us make this process very efficient. And you see things like storyboarding fall out of this process as a means of just like quickly and inexpensively getting people on the same page, just to avoid more costly errors down the line. With digital, it's the same thing, but really, digital grows out of the software business. It's like, pixels and code, like kind of like moving around objects. And it goes back to just like kind of like the 80s. Like a lot of the processes that I first used when I started doing technical work, like in the mid 90s, like were borrowed from like software. These waterfall production techniques, just like a lot of the documentation we used, just like kind of came out of, the rooms of bearded people in the 1980s, just like sitting in front of CRT computer terminals. And just like, storyboards are a great like kind of like tool for advancing a film idea, just like prototyping, like in paper prototyping specifically, like just like represent the same for products and other digital techniques. At the heart of it, though, and the thing that's most uncomfortable, I think, for agencies is this idea just of fast and ugly, like, which is what prototyping is. And just like one quick story, just like for why like it's effective. In the 1950s, this British industrialist created this like prize, 50,000 Great British Pounds, to the first organization that could fly a human-powered vehicle over the English Channel. And it attracted all these like incredibly big brains from like corporations and research institutions and leading universities. And for 15 years, like, I mean, just like developed, dedicated a lot of time and effort and thought like to cracking this thing, and no one could. Like, and then just at the very end, like about 2 years like from its completion, a US aeronautics engineer named Paul McCready, working largely on his own, like kind of like figured it out. And the way that he figured it out was just by defining it as not a design or a technology problem, but as a process problem. Like, so he saw that these like, you know, large universities and research institutions were going off like building like just like these really like kind of complete like representation of vehicles, flying them once, taking them back into the lab, refining them for 8 or 9 months, and then, you know, maybe flying them once or twice every like kind of like 14 to 18 months. What he did is he built like this incredibly crude, like flexible model that he could fly multiple times in a single day. Like, so his rate of learning, like just like based on failure and refinement, just like was so like markedly different than anyone else that he was competing against, that he was actually the one that won it with a much smaller team and just with much less funding. And I think that like the idea of the value of prototyping just like kind of comes from stories like these. And again, just like with agencies, like the thing that makes this kind of tough is this idea of valuing speed like over perfection. Like a lot of like my experience in agencies, for very good reasons, like, I mean, just like taught you that like kind of ugly is a scary thing. Just like kind of the expectation, just like for polish and completeness, like in ideas that you present to clients, like is very important. Like, and just like presenting something that's crude, that requires a little bit of explanation, giving somebody like something to play with that might not be fully functional is terrifying. It breaks like this like expectation for how we have worked with clients for the past 50 years. Like, you know, in thinking about like developing like, you know, good tools, like, I mean, it's also like needing to step out of that mentality. So like last slide here, and then we'll jump into the first exercise. It's important to think, like, as agencies, a lot of the work that we've done, like, kind of is focused around trying to capture people's attention. Like, and when you get that attention, like, it's delivering a very persuasive message. Like, with prototyping, you're kind of testing a different idea. Just like the first is, like, will somebody elect to use the thing that I build? The internet, like digital channels, are inherently volitional. Like, I mean, you have to ask yourself, like, why would I click on this? Why would I complete this form? Why would I download or use this application? And prototypes, like, are a great means of testing that hypothesis. The second, just importantly, is just like, are people going to understand this? Like, there's a lot of conventions and behaviors that people have, just like we all have them. Like, the expectation that things are going to behave in a certain way that conforms with how we use products and software. But it's also a great means of just like saying, the way that I've organized this, like, are people going to be able to understand it and complete the task? Enough talk. I think the next thing is to jump in and get started.
So this is going to require a little bit of dance and a little bit of patience from you guys. But what we're going to do is try to get you guys in groups of 5 to 10 or so. So if you've already got a table with that number, like, cool. If you are sort of alone at a table, we're going to ask you to sort of move to the nearest one. On most tables, there's going to be an exercise. It's a one-page exercise, sort of a brief, if you will, sort of an app idea that we'd love for you guys to start thinking about for us. Like, we have some markers and pens. We also have devices. The key things to think about is that each team is working on one idea together. You're not working on your own idea. As Matt said, just like whatever you design should be intended for a volitional audience. So you need to design for a person, one specific person. How might they use this? And then we've got some of the other sort of like best sort of practices up here on the board. We're going to give you about 20 minutes, and we're going to walk around and sort of jump in with you guys. So
last thing, just like if you could look up in the screen, just like the work that you do should be crude. Like, there's no points like for just like rendering something like beautifully. If people know how to draw, that's great. But just like the value is really just like in the minimum amount of information that can that expresses like the greatest piece of the idea. I'll put this here for you, and then are we turned off now?
What a lonely feeling I have inside. Oh, since you've been gone away. Well, you know I tried so hard, girl, to do what was right because I felt that you were slipping away. Baby, since you've been gone, girl, I feel so bad. You know I think I'm gonna lose my mind. Oh, but if you can find it in your heart to come home, oh baby, if you would be so kind, hurry back. Oh, baby, baby, well, I know I was wrong, girl, for telling your friends about all the bad things that you did. Oh, but the wine we drunk at the party last night must have gone right straight to my head. Please come on back. Oh, baby, hurry. I need you by my side, just to be my guide, baby. I want you, darling. Oh, baby. Come on back.
So many keys have opened your heart and thrown it away just like a falling star. But if you would give me a chance, oh, to be your new romance, I have the master key to your heart. Oh, the master key to your heart. Now the first key was closer than a brother. The second one told you that there would be no other. But they were full of jive, and I heard you deep inside. But I have a master key to your heart. I have the master key to your heart. I want to love you and to treat you right. Hold you in my arms both day and night. And then, baby, kiss you all the time and whisper, I love you forever. You're mine, all mine. Once I get in, then you will see. I'll change all the locks
much longer. I can't last much longer. Please, please believe me when I say how much I love you. I love you. Oh, what more do you want me to do? Oh, I know I'm a fool for you, baby. I can't keep my cool, baby. Everything you wanted, you got with no sweat at all. I was a fool. Now here I am, and you won't even you can at least come see me sometime. I love you. I love you. I love you. Oh, baby, I do.
Tomorrow may not be exactly what I want it to be, but if it's fine here with you, I'll be alright. I'll be alright. Tomorrow may bring rain. Tomorrow might even bring pain, but if it's fine here with you, I'll be alright. I'll be alright. I'll be alright. Tomorrow, whoa, 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 I love you as today. Tomorrow, whoa, 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 I love you, love you, come on, baby. Tomorrow may not be exactly what I want it to be, but if it's fine here with you, I'll be alright. I'll be alright. I'll be alright.
Hey guys, just so everybody knows you got about 10 more minutes. So if you've just been sketching in the margins or you've been putting it in your head, it's time to get it on paper. So start drawing. Don't be afraid that you're not an artist. Just start sketching, start drawing. We got plenty of pieces of paper. You got about 10 minutes, okay?
you're gonna have to do. You're gonna have to get down on your knees and look up and tell her this. You got to look way back. You got to look way back. You got to search every corner. You got to look way back. If you want your baby, you got to think about her eyes. If you want your baby, you got to think about her nose. You got to look way back into your baby heart. You see, my woman used to treat me so good. I used to run around with brand new suits on and have them old pockets full of money. And finally one day I got home and I found my baby gone. People, you know that hurted me so bad I had to hang my head and cry. But I'll never forget the words she left on the bed. It was a note in a little white envelope. And it went something like this. She said, you didn't look back. You didn't even know I was living. She said, you didn't look back. You didn't even know I was crying. She said, where were you looking when I was sitting down sighing? But from now on, I'm gonna take some good advice. I'm gonna look way back. I said I'm gonna look way back. I'm gonna search my baby heart. I'm gonna look way back. I'm gonna search my baby mind. I'm gonna look way back. I wanna look into my baby eyes. I gotta look way back. I wanna look deep down in my baby. I wanna look way back. I gotta look way
It's funny, funny feeling. Got me rocking and reeling.
All right, we're going to take about 2 more minutes. Try and start wrapping up your ideas. 2 more minutes. 2 more minutes.
Your mojo's working on me. Baby, I just can't see no one but you. No one but you. Morning, noon, and night. I long to hold you tight. Morning, noon, and night.
get, then I won't want you. Everything gonna go my way, and I won't need nobody. I'm gonna be a real gonna get.
All right, folks. I'm going to make you suffer through a couple more slides. But thanks for sort of like gelling with your team so quickly. Thanks for sketching. And don't sort of lose all the good thoughts you had in your mind, because we're going to give you another chance to sort of revise it just a little bit with some feedback here in a minute. So the process you guys just went through, just like in our world we call it paper prototyping, pretty obvious, like that's what that is. Like, and when we think about that as a process and how it's different than sort of the way advertising processes traditionally have worked, brand marketing, is that if you have a project and you have a concepting period, and then you sort of have a period where you actually build it, and then you have sort of the media process, and then you increasingly have an opportunity to tweak it. What's not usually included in that process is like a real effort to sort of like limit or reduce the risk. And when I say risk, I just mean the risk of it being successful. And I think that's why there's always been like a fair amount of tension between agencies sort of really needing to fight and push hard for like the risky ideas, knowing that the client's going to sort of like lose faith at the last minute, get shaky knees, and sort of drop out. And part of the reason that the clients are sort of shaky is because they have a massive investment, as you see in the graph here. Like all the cost is backloaded in this, right? Because the media is so expensive that like you can really run into a situation where like you shoot big and you don't have much to show for yourself. I think in our world, when we think about sort of software, and increasingly what us as agencies, what we're being asked to do, as Matt mentioned, is create things that have volitional end uses, right? Things where when you put it in front of someone, you actually want them to engage with it. They're not being forced to view it through sort of a media channel. And this also comes from IDEO, just like their human-centered design kit, where you think about sort of the core 3 components of a good software interactive experience. The first, I think, is sort of the real shift for all of us in agencies, which is desirability. Just like above all, the user is the most important person. And we need to design for exactly what they need. Not what we think they need, but what they have sort of like exhibited to us as a need. Feasibility, really important, because we think about, for all the challenges you guys have in front of you, just like you probably all went in very lofty directions. Just like, what if the refrigerator could do this thing and was hooked into this API, and like we had radar, and just someone was talking about drones, just, you know what I mean? All, like, cool. It's like, can it actually be done? Just like, and then viability, like the other thing is just like you want to create a smart refrigerator. It feels like you've got to connect 1,000 features with 1,000 other products. Like, it could take you 5 years and sort of like $10 million that you might not have, right? So what are the other limiting factors, and how do we get something out quickly? And I think when we say prototyping, people immediately think like geeks and software and technology. But truth is, like, the business case behind prototyping could have just as easily come from sort of an MBA. And if you look at this, the primary goal of prototyping is to reduce product risk at the lowest possible cost, right? So that's why doing exercises like these, it costs us nothing. It costs us some Sharpies and 20 minutes of your time, just like when you're just like quickly rooting out the crap ideas. Like, and what we can do there, it saves all of our costs, all of our dollars, all of our energy for actually putting it in the market and then refining it, right? That's where the opportunity for reinvestment comes, is once we can actually get feedback on things. And what we're ideally hoping to prevent, let's see if this plays because it's worth it, nice. I think like in advertising, it keeps getting funnier, I think, like the more you watch it. When we think of being software people, like, what we can't afford is this moment. Like, if we haven't put something out that we don't have some sense that people actually want, just like people aren't going to spend any more than 1 second with your app or on your website. Like, we have our window of opportunity is incredibly slim. I think as advertisers and as brands traditionally, we've been able to throw things out there, go big or go home on ideas. And if it shoots back and hits us in the face, like, we're usually big enough to sort of like tackle it, or like the CMO will just fire the agency. Do you know what I mean? Classic sort of like turnover moment. But I think in software, it's quite a bit different. And like one model sort of mental model to use to think about this is one that Spotify actually uses. Spotify, a really great product development company. If you ever want to read about them organizationally, sort of the way they operate, a really fascinating sort of culture. They talk about, they're using this concept that's been very familiar in software circles for a long time, which is called minimum viable product. You've probably heard that used. What is sort of like the smallest package of things that accomplishes whatever we've sort of defined to be the user need. And the way they coin it is sort of lovable but limited, right? How can you create something that still sort of has that charm and has that sense of sort of utility that you're going for, but it's limited, right? You're not trying to sort of like cover the whole scope of potential needs sort of that's sort of like inherent in the challenge that you're faced with. So what they talk about is if you were going to try to build something that was going to move people, right, efficiently and effectively. One way to do it is, of course, to start with the wheels and then get to the chassis and then get to the sort of like the physical design of it, and then suddenly you have a car. But the problem is that at step 1, step 2, and step 3, you couldn't put a human in that and test how it worked, or if it worked, or if they liked it, or what they didn't like about it, right? So the circle of feedback is so much larger. So they talk a lot about sort of like the skateboard test, right? Just like if you have a big idea, just like give me the skateboard version, because what I can do with the skateboard is I can put somebody on it and I can push them, and I can see how it works, and I can eventually find out that handlebars would be pretty useful, and then I could find out that actually if they could power it themselves more efficiently, like a bike, that would be helpful. And then I can figure out that if I throw an engine on it, I'll have a motorcycle, and then eventually get to a car, right? Of course, this isn't the actual way that anyone's ever designed a car, but it's sort of just the inherent understanding that if you can put a human on it sooner, like the more quickly you're going to learn, and sort of the better results you're going to have. So I'm not paid to talk about Google, but I think they are a good case study in thinking about sort of this sort of MVP sort of scenario. If you remember the search wars of the early 2000s, just like many other sort of formidable sort of competitors in the Google space were filling up their homepage with widgets and weather and finance and stocks and sort of sidebars and pop-ups and all sorts of other exciting things that at least appeared to be sort of interesting to users, but truthfully, just like most people rejected that because they never expressed the need for those other things, and all they came to a search engine for was to be a search engine. And I think the magic of Google sort of getting as much traction as it did, of course, in addition to like sort of its algorithm and sort of the back end underneath it, was really that they knew exactly what they did well, and that's the thing that they focus on. They doubled down on it, and they continue to do that to this day. And I think a really important lesson as we think about not only designing what you guys are sketching on right now, but I think also for us as companies, as we develop our offering or as we sort of face the challenges that we do with talent or sort of like competition in the product, like how do we sort of keep that core focus on one thing so as to not sort of like end up bloated. And then just to talk a little bit about the actual exercise you're doing here. I know it feels like sort of sort of like conference gamey, like, oh, everybody sits in a circle and has pens and draws. It's like, but like honest to goodness, like as a Google employee, like this is the way that we design products at Google. This is exactly where we start. We literally start with pens and 11 by 17 sheets of paper. Just like, so this is not just a conference game. I know it seems silly. It doesn't seem like all of us should have college educations to do something like this. Just like, but truthfully, this is where sort of like the best ideas in product design start. Paper prototyping, great for a number of reasons. Flexible form. Anything that you have an idea for, paper is a really great way to get started with it. It's destructible. I think all of us in the agency world, once something gets sort of designed in Photoshop, it's really hard to throw it away, right? Just like you have it, it was well designed, it's in the back of your mind. It's like you can try to delete the file, but it keeps popping back up. Just like paper's amazing, because you can just grab it, you crumple it, and you throw it to the side, and your brain very quickly forgets that sort of like you ever created it in the first place. It requires no discernible skill. I can't tell you how many people I just walk in the room right now say, well, but I can't draw. Just like, but that's not the point. Isn't sort of the quality of the drawing. The point is that you're just actually putting it out there, just like so that it can be sort of reacted upon by other people, whether they're on your team or sort of other folks sort of in other groups. I think a really important one for the agency world is ego leveling. Because if we can bring everybody down to sort of like, there's no more sort of pockets of like, well, I'm the designer, I'm the writer, I'm the, sort of the strategist. Like everyone can use a pen, everyone can use paper. And then we've brought it down to such an elementary level that there's no sort of like posturing. It doesn't matter how senior you are. Like if you're the one with the blazer or you're the one that's sort of the intern, it doesn't really matter who you are. Just like we've suddenly got it down to like a very sort of economical sort of like average in terms of like how people are working together. And then lastly, you have aligned incentives. Like I was laughing with Yvonne's group. He was saying just like they had really good team chemistry. Just like, and I think that's actually really important because what you all have here is just pens, paper, and each other. And it's a really great way to start from something blank rather than coming with sort of like political sort of like mindedness that often happens in sort of like grandstanding, happens in brainstorming meetings that I think we've all faced and are all just, they're not even unique to advertising or marketing. They're really problems in sort of like how teams work together. So there are a couple of sort of drawbacks, of course, to paper prototyping. Low fidelity, right? It's really hard to actually test sort of if someone would use this thing just because you sketched it on paper. There are other ways to ladder up prototypes. If anyone wants to talk about what those are, happy to talk about them. There are later stages of this. You wouldn't go from this to actually investing millions of dollars into building something. And then the other challenge, of course, is that and when we're about to do this, we're about to put your ideas in front of other people, you're going to tend to get more feedback when you actually, what you want is reactions. So the way we normally test product ideas is really sort of actually filming people, like you guys have seen like sort of eye tracking studies, things like that, like how do people actually physically react to the thing. But either way, paper prototyping is just a really great place to start. And then the last point I'll make is I think all of us, like when we look at these concepts, they're intentionally sort of overbaked, right? We try to stuff a lot of things into each of these briefs. And I think that the thing to remember about any good idea, like if you're actually sort of like prototyping it, again, whether it's an internal idea that you have around sort of organizational design or whether it's a concept for your clients, is just like assume that once you get it out there, you can grow with your user base, right? You can grow with the people that you're responsible for serving. And I think if you think about Mark Zuckerberg when he started Facebook in the early 2000s, he didn't sit down with like this sort of imagination of all the things that it would eventually be, that it would be this huge sort of media powerhouse and that it would sort of enable all these connections in all these sort of unexpected ways. They started with something like this, right? Just a very basic sort of core idea that a social network was a valuable thing to a certain set of people. Started with messaging and this idea of friending. And over time, they've developed, they've grown, they've also created lots of features that were total dog shit that then they've thrown away, right? And that's great product teams do that. And I think like it's a really good sort of like instinct for us as agency people to continue to think about sort of how we can develop that more in sort of the way we work and the work that we do. So what we're going to do now is this is also going to take a little bit of wrangling. We're going to take one person from each table and we're going to send them to another team. And they're going to go to another team and they're going to sit down with that team. And the goal here is to put the prototype that you've sort of sketched out here in front of them. The super key part, though, is that you can't, the point's not to explain what you did, because if you're explaining what you did, you're automatically injecting sort of the bias of your idea in it. The goal is to put it in front of them, sort of give them a little bit of brief of what they're looking at, and then have them just like start, what if I push this button, and ask them what they would expect to happen if they push that thing. And if what they expect is different than what you guys had assumed, well then maybe that's a little bit of good feedback to start thinking about. Ask questions, watch closely, and then I think, again, like another theme, just like, no points for being right. And hopefully you don't feel overly attached to your paper prototype, which is really the goal, and that you're open for sort of modifications, changes, and new ideas. So we'll do this for about 10 minutes. Matt and I and the Smith and Beta folks will kind of come and just like pluck people and move them around. So be patient with us while we just kind of get everybody settled. But we'll do that for about 10 minutes or so, and then we'd love to just have more conversation or hear about your process after that. Cool.
All right.
What am I gonna do now that I've lost you? And how can I face another day? Ooh, what will I tell my curious friends? For I know their questions will have no end. Since you've been gone, I've been so blue and I'm so all alone. My poor little heart is torn apart. Ooh, I just can't get you out of my mind, and I know I won't for a long, long time. Staring eyes. The moment I go outside, I have to turn my head the other way. Ooh, I just can't face my curious friends. I know their questions will have no end. Since you've been gone, I've been so blue and I'm so all alone. And my poor little heart is torn apart. Ooh, I just can't get you out of my mind. I know I won't for a long, long wonder what am I gonna do now that I've lost you, baby. I sit here wondering what I'm gonna do. I realize only you will do.
Every time I call your name, I get such a thrill I can't explain. Oh, I'm so glad, oh honey, that I'm your man. We fell in love on a Wednesday morning with all of our heart and soul. And people, I know you should have been there to see my girl rock and roll. And she said, tita-tita-ta. Every time she cha-cha-cha, she said, tita-tita-ta. Every time she cha-cha-cha. Her love for me is wider than the ocean, goes deeper than the sea. Whoa, she make me feel so good when she rock and roll for me. And she said, tita-tita-ta. Every time she cha-cha-cha, she said, tita-tita-ta. Every time she cha-cha-cha. Every time I call your name, I get such a thrill I can't explain. Whoa, I'm so glad, oh honey, that I'm your man. We fell in love on a Wednesday morning with all of our heart and soul. And people, I know you should have been there to see my girl rock and roll. And she said, tita-tita-ta. Every time she cha-cha-cha, she said, tita-tita-ta. Every time she cha-cha-cha. You looking good, honey. Tita-tita-ta. Every time you cha-cha-cha. My baby, yes she did. Let's do it one more time, honey. Tita-tita-ta. Every time you cha-cha-cha. I got the red step, honey.
All right, we're going to do, just try and start wrapping it up. Like we're going to do about 2 more minutes, and then we're going to dedicate a little bit of time to talking about the exercise. 2 minutes, everybody. 2 minutes.
Of my lonely, lonely nights, when I told you that I love you, place no one above you. Maybe you didn't believe, 'cause you wouldn't treat me right. My love is in your hands. Feels like my life is going down in quicksand. Like a broken arrow without a destiny. That's me. It's true love. It's all me.
Right at.
Why can't you see?
All right, folks. I know there's a lot to talk about, and we really appreciate you guys swapping tables and sharing stories. we weren't able to give you quite as much time there as we'd hoped, but I think you guys got all the general sense of just sort of like the value of someone outside of sort of like your initial sort of group coming in and helping you, quickly give feedback on something that they can relate to. We have.
I think we got about 2 minutes, like maybe enough just to take just like some comments from people. I mean, just like rather than like directing questions like back up at us, it might make sense to flip it around. Like if anyone had like kind of like thoughts on the exercise, like if it worked the way that you expected, just like if it was different, like if it was awful, like yeah, just like kind of hearing from some of the participants just about what they thought. Otherwise, Ryan's going to sing. Excellent.
I guess I have a more general question about idea generation. I've been in tons of these whiteboarding sessions, and people say there's no such thing as a bad idea. At some point there is, and you should fail quickly, right? Or like, how do you weigh these?
Yeah, it's a great point. We'll post a link to a great like Tim Brown like TED Talk just that deals about like kind of like with the need to create an open like kind of environment that encourages people to just like put out there. But it is a very fine line. Like I mean, just like when there's knowably like kind of bad ideas that are being put out. Like, but I think the tendency is just to accommodate them, that they start to just like migrate to the end, and you're doing like kind of much more damage by just like editing people in the moment. Like, so it's just really the important thing is protecting the dynamic, and just like the bad ideas tend to filter out. But I mean, it's something that we struggle with all the time, as I'm sure to you. Yeah.
Jeremy? Yeah.
Yeah, just had a question. You said you guys use 11 by 17 sheets of paper. You said you use 11 by 17 sheets of paper,
Yeah.
and I know in a lot of meetings we're in, and probably a lot of agencies do this, they'll whiteboard it.
Sure.
But it seems like, and I guess I don't know if I'm answering the question or not, it seems like someone then kind of controls the creativity because they're up on the right whiteboard. Does that sort of democratize the process, or why do you guys do it?
I think it certainly can. I mean, you do, with whiteboards, sometimes it's like whoever's got the marker is the one that's in charge. But I mean, you're already dealing with complicated team dynamics of like the very smart person in the corner who's more introverted, doesn't say anything, like you have to find it. So I think it's more complex than that. I think the reason we tend to use 11 by 17 paper, or you can use Post-it notes, we tend to be designing experiences, right? And they're not linear. They tend to sort of like weave sort of in and out. So I think if you can get something that actually moves, right? Like you can suddenly start to do lots of this, oh, let's move this thing over here. On a whiteboard, you're just like, like a race, like,
yeah.
And I think also I don't know why this is, but I think when you see people whiteboard, they tend to actually try to like refine things more. It's almost like if you just give people like the most basic human tools, like a pencil and a sheet of paper, I know this sounds crazy, but it's almost more like coloring time. Just like people just kind of naturally express themselves much more easily than when they're up on a whiteboard. That doesn't mean we don't use whiteboards. I'm not like anti-whiteboard. But I think this is just a good way to kind of get messy and kind of create more of an active workspace versus sort of like something that tends to be sort of like you're limited in the scope of how big or sort of how it flows on a board.
Cool. Yeah, I think they're bringing up the music. So.
And we got one more.
One more.
I think what was
don't deny this
interesting
man,
at
yeah.
our table was the differences between our assumptions and what we thought people would want, and then when a consumer used the product,
Yeah.
what they thought was silly or didn't make any sense at all.
Yeah.
One thing that I wonder, I guess for everybody in here, right? A lot of what we do, we spend a lot of time, like you said, making Photoshop files and all these big ideas and these amazing presentations. And then there's very little time to change things once we actually get going, right? It's almost like we've committed to a path. I wonder what you guys think about, this sort of rapid prototyping for creative concepting and really working with clients. And I guess from your experience, how you suggest it's possible to do that.
Two thoughts in there. One is just like I think this works for like digital, but I don't think it works well for just like kind of like film and other narrative ideas where just like this like elicits a lot of feedback. So it's not like this is a replacement. It's more just like designed to support a different outcome. But one thing that we've had great success with is just a much more informal like relationship with the clients where they become a participant like in the meetings, just like so they're like kind of going along with the team, and it also has the added benefit of they start to feel like a sense of attachment like to the idea that they carry back to their organization. So like the interaction with the client becomes like much more informal, much more frequent, like, and just like there are no big presentations, like, because everyone's doing the work together and it kind of evolves together. But just like kind of like that next level of just like what it means in terms of the agency client dynamic, I think is a really important one that we couldn't get into. But just like, I think you're right in pointing out that this is just like the tip of the iceberg. There's a lot that falls out beneath it. Cool.
Great.
All right.
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, thanks very
nice
much.
Day.
Thank you. I hope everybody had some fun sort of